Good morning. It's Animal Talk Thursdays. Today is actually not Thursday because it is for you watching this, but we have had to pre-record this talk this week because we have things that we're doing, prepping for our big open house this weekend. So we hope we're going to be seeing a bunch of you come to our open house Saturday from 11 to 4. We hope to see you there. So today we have some questions, and I'm Dawn Hayman, Animal Communicator, co-founder of Spring Farm Cares. And I have Becca behind the camera, who is going to be the voice, the disembodied voice behind the camera. And she's going to ask some questions that many of you wrote in on last week's session. So we'll go ahead with the question.
Okay, this first one is a great question. Because animals and humans have different languages, how are we able to communicate in such great detail despite speaking different languages?
Yeah, that's a good question. So telepathy, as we talked about in the first session, telepathy is the basis of all communication. So telepathy doesn't. There's no boundaries with languages. For example, I often am talking to animals in other countries for people that don't speak English. Now, I have to have somebody that can speak, English so that I can talk to the people. However, when it comes time to talk to the animals, it doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter from wildlife to domestic, from snakes to horses to cows. It doesn't matter. It's not like each species speaks a different language and you have to learn all these different languages. Telepathy is just the knowing behind the words. So it doesn't require any kind of different ability to talk to a different species of animal. So I hope that answers that question.
Yes.
Yeah.
And do you think because of that, sometimes depending on what animal communicator you're talking with, they the information they give you might be feel a little different because it's in their own language?
Absolutely. So that's a really good point. So telepathy is also subjective. So when I get an animal communication, or I get a communication from an animal, I run it through my life experience and perspective. So it'll sound a certain way because that's how I speak. But I try to bring through the animal's personality and energy while I'm talking so that the person that I'm talking to, for example, let me just give this is an interesting example. Sometimes when I was doing phone consultations, I would have animals from a multi-animal household. So the person would tell me the name, let's say they had 5 cats. So they would tell me the name of the cat they wanted me to talk to and a description of what the cat looks like. And I would then I would get a telepathic connection with that cat. And the way that happens for me is I would feel that cat's energy and personality. And I would say something like, "Ooh, she's really spunky, isn't she?" And the person inevitably, if it's the wrong animal, would start laughing and say, "No, that's my other cat. And she's always butting in." Like they'll know who it is based on what I said. So the people know when I get it, or I'll get a connection with the cat and say, "Wow, he's like really quiet and reserved, but he's got a really good sense of humor." And they'll say, "That's my cat," like they feel them. And then that's how I know I have a connection. And then I would go forward with the communication and ask the animal questions and get what they're doing. But I'm going to put things in my perspective. So I'm not going to hear something from an animal that I don't believe in or that I can't, be open to hearing. That's important, that the person who is getting the communication is going to translate through their own life experiences and their own understanding. So I've been doing this for over 35 years, and I'm more fine-tuned now, way more fine-tuned now than I was 30 years ago as to what I can ask an animal, what I can understand, my understanding of how they see the world. Each animal sees the world in a unique way, just like humans do. But also different species are like talking to people from different cultures of animals. So they have a different understanding of how things operate. And you have to be able to get that from their perspective.
Yeah, so I guess it's the same as humans that just like some people have a sense of humor and some people
Right.
don't. It's the same with
Absolutely the
animals.
same. So I tend to have a good sense of humor. So I tend to draw that out both in people and in animals, which makes life very fun for me because I get some really humorous animal friends, even including wildlife. I'll have wildlife do really funny things around me and just to make me laugh or whatever. But they're also coming off of my energy and interacting with me in that way. So when they see that I like to joke or have humor, then they will respond that way to me. And if they're really serious, I also need to adapt to them and not joke around with an animal, obviously, that doesn't have a good sense of humor, just like a person.
Do animals develop their different personalities just like humans do? So, like environment, who they're around, genetics, is it kind of the same?
Absolutely. So animals, I can tell you some of the animals when they come here to our sanctuary, especially if they've been neglected or they're run down or they have some disability or uh, they've been in a bad situation. We tell people all the time because people, let's just say we get a horse that comes in and is extremely underweight, very weak, run down. I always tell our staff, you got to watch out because they'll say, "Oh, she's so sweet, she's so mild mannered and it's so quiet and everything." But I say, "Wait, just wait." Because when they get a few groceries in and they start putting weight on and they're feeling good and confident in life again, their real personality starts to come out. And usually animals that survive some kind of hardship like that are very strong-willed characters. That's how they survive. So they usually later will find that out, and we get some really interesting characters here.
So interesting. Um, so on the topic of different species, because there are some animals that we associate with being more like loving and affectionate, like a dog or cat, and then there are
Sure.
some animals like reptiles that we might not associate with affection like that. Does an animal's capacity to be affectionate vary based on their?
I would say no. Um, Animals have the same capacity to love and be affectionate and compassionate as any other species from one to the next. How they express that, though, is different. So we as humans often overlook that. For example, we have a lot of times people will come to animal communication workshops here. And they'll go out to talk to the horses or a goat, and they'll come back in and say to me, I was in the middle of a conversation, and all of a sudden he turned his back on me and he went over and pooped in the corner. So clearly he wasn't, wanting to communicate with me. And when I talk to the horse or the goat, and I say, this person came to talk to you, how, did you say anything? They'll say to me, I was in the middle of trying to tell them something and suddenly they turned and walked away. And I think I covered this actually maybe in the last talk. So, but I'm not sure if I'm recapping.
You talked about it in the workshop.
Okay. Because it's a common mistake we make to think that animals have to have eye contact with us. If it was a human we were talking to and they turned their back on us and walked away, clearly we should be offended because they're not paying attention. But that's not true in the animal world. They don't have to have the same eye contact or things that we consider etiquette, proper etiquette, social etiquette among humans is not the same for them. So we have to keep that in mind. And snakes, you brought up snakes. Snakes are largely misunderstood because they can be incredibly affectionate. And even though I am not a quote snake person where I don't have a snake or whatever, I have done some work with snakes that were just incredible communications and how affectionate they were towards people and other animals and nature and how close to nature that they are. So we can't judge that by the fact that they don't crawl in our laps and snuggle, but they still can be affectionate in other ways. Yeah.
And I guess does the affection that they want to receive varies too. Like the way that they want you to be affectionate towards them
Right.
probably varies.
That's also true with our dogs and cats. So there's sometimes, especially with little dogs, for example, that can be picked up and snuggled or dressed up in clothing. Some of them absolutely love it. They absolutely love it. And there are some of them that absolutely hate it. So, it just depends on their personality. But some animals love to be dressed up or they'll do it for the human. They'll say, well, she loves to put me in these sweaters, but it makes her happy. And if it makes her happy, then I'm happy. And others of them were like, yes, I should have a purple sweater. And they'll be very specific how much they like their sweater. And there are others that were like, I don't know why she puts this sweater on me. It just depends on their personality. But we have to be careful with that because we humans tend to want to smother things sometimes in affection, and they may not like that. I have horses that here that love to stick their nose out of their stall and have somebody come up and rub on them or kiss their nose, and they're very affectionate. And there are other ones, if you go to do that, they find that humiliating. It's like beneath them.
Mm.
So it just depends.
But that doesn't mean they don't want attention. They just
Correct.
want it on their own terms.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
But
think,
I mean, we humans are the same way. So, and sometimes sometimes you're in the mood to be more affectionate and sometimes not. And it's the same with the animals. It doesn't mean that just because they're like that one day or one time of their life, that that's them all the time. We tend to do that with animals. We'll pigeonhole an animal. Well, we do it with people too, but we tend to think, I've had one interaction and we label that animal as aloof or whatever. It could just be that they're in a moment where they're overwhelmed or um, depends on the situation that they're in as well.
that's a really great point. Yeah, we'll say like, oh, my cat is grouchy.
Right, right.
Personality.
Or somebody will say that's just cats, but
Yeah, well, yeah.
but it's not. That's an overgeneralization that we will make sometimes about animals. Animals that are in shelters or rescues, and now that's another thing. You take an animal that's suddenly lost its home and put in a shelter, and they are going through multiple layers of emotions. They're devastated for losing their family. They suddenly are in a place they don't know anybody. They're scared. And then now we're showing them for adoption, and we're not really seeing the animal for who it is. You're seeing an animal that's reacting to their situation. And I think we forget that sometimes.
Yeah, and we want them to kind of show their best self
Yes,
so they can get adopted.
right.
But yeah, we don't take into account what they've just been through.
Exactly. And we don't pay attention to that. And it's a fate that befalls a lot of shelter animals, that end up in homes, and the people say, sometimes it's a pleasant thing. It's like my partner and I just adopted a very shy dog from a shelter. I mean, very shy. We knew they were going to have trouble adopting this dog out because she socially just shut down, and we've had dogs like that before, so we were attracted to her and said, "Oh, this is going to be good." And what we got back was a very reactive dog, a very nervous and reactive dog, not aggressive but reactive to things. She was scared. And as we're seeing her now, we got her at 6 months old. Now she's about 3. She's suddenly starting to really find her niche, and she's coming out. And now we're starting to see a whole different dog. It was the one that we could feel in there when we met her, but she had to come through a whole process to find that, and she's still finding it. Yeah,
Another kind of misunderstood creature is insects, which
insects.
might be something that you might not think of right off the bat when we talk about animal communication, but we got a great question about insects. And, are they, as far as communication goes, do we treat them the same as we treat other animals? Obviously, there's some insects like ants or spiders or even ticks or mosquitoes that can
Right.
be a nuisance. So how do we deal with that?
Yeah. So I'm asked this all the time. Can you make ticks and fleas stop getting on my animals? No. Ticks and fleas, I wish, but ticks and fleas are parasites, and parasites do what parasites do, which is they feed off of other animals. They feed off the blood of dogs and cats. So asking a tick to not bite your dog is like asking them, do you mind just dying? They're not going to do that. So we have to be realistic with what our requests are. Some people are very successful, like with ants, for example. If you start to see them come in the house, some people have strike a deal with them and say, hey, I'm going to feed you some stuff outside the house, and they'll leave like pieces of sugar outside or something like that. And you're welcome to stay outside, but not in the house. And they have had it work. Other times not. There's a wonderful story in a book called Kinship with All Life by, I think it's J. Allen Boone. And he tells a story about Freddie the fly. And he had a fly that was just really annoying him and kept landing on him. And finally, he started seeing if he could communicate with this fly. And he writes about this in the book. And he had this wonderful experience with this fly that he named Freddie. And Freddie was very, communicated with him about what he wanted and what was best and how they could coexist together. And he said, you could be in here. I just don't want you crawling on my arm. And Freddie would do it. So I've had those experiences for sure with flies. But insects, it's tough. They're living when I say it's tough on us, they're living their life the way they're supposed to. They're doing what they're supposed to do as an insect. And I think we forget that. And I think one of the things that helps is when any life form is treated with respect and dignity, and gratitude for what they do, they respond to that instead of the war that we wage against them and against other parts of nature. They'll respond to that too, and they'll push back harder. And if we get into that kind of relationship with them, then that's what they will do. Yeah.
And like we talked about, I think we touched on last time when we talked about wild animals, they have a different concept of death, and I'm sure
Right.
it's the same thing with insects
Yes.
and the life cycle than
Yeah.
we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I also just want to highlight, not a question, but a great comment that someone left on last week's video. She said that based on last week's session we had, she changed one of her chickens' names from Buffy to Princess Kate. She thinks that she would like that better.
That's
I just
great.
wanted to highlight that.
That's great. And names, what we name our animals, is important. Did we discuss that in the first one? I'm not sure we did actually.
I don't think we did.
No. Maybe that's a good last topic here. What we name our animals is really important because the names we choose have connotations and pictures and energy behind them. So some of the worst horses, the most difficult, I should say, horses that we've ever worked on here were horses that had names like Nightmare. And that's a common name for a mare. I don't know why people do that, but Nightmare. Nightmare comes with a connotation of they're difficult, they're a nightmare, they're horrible. And that energy constantly is around them because people respond to that from the name. And the animals will take that on. So if you have an animal with a behavioral problem, you may want to look at the name and how hard is the name, like harsh is the name. I had worked with a horse once. I'll never forget this. I didn't even get the information like the name and age and everything from the person yet. The person was telling me they were calling me because they had a horse that was spinning all the time and would spin so hard that the rider would fly off and they couldn't get this horse to stop this. And it was a young horse. They were just backing it for the first time. So probably 2, 3 years old. And so when I started asking him for the information on the horse, and I said, what is this horse's name? The horse's name was Whirlwind. And I said, did you name him that because he does this? And they're like, no. That's like a registered name, and it comes down from his heritage. And I was like, really? Well, this will sound goofy, but you may want to try changing the name because whirlwind indicates spinning. And that I said, I know it sounds stupid, but that's the picture that comes with his name all the time is whirlwind is just spinning. And they humored me with that. And they actually did try to change, they did change his name. They changed his name to Arrow, which I thought was interesting, straight as an arrow. And his behavior stopped. Yeah, I remember getting the letter in the mail saying, I can't believe this, but it totally stopped. So that is an extreme example. But I've had horses, big horses, 17 two-hand horses, that are as timid as can be, that are named Mouse. Again, it's a common name people do with big horses. They think it's cute, so they name them Mouse. But all that comes with Mouse is timidity and the smallness and whatever. I've worked with all those people and suggested name changes. And when they change them, the horse's whole persona changes. So there's a lot in a name. Think about it for yourselves. Your name is important to you, maybe more important to some than others, but you wouldn't, your name, and people change their names because they don't like their name, or it's sometimes different phases in our lives. We want a different name. So that there's a lot to that.
Yeah. You showed us a great video on that. I think it was that panther, the Black Panther named Diablo.
Yes.
Is that his name?
Yeah.
Maybe we could link that in the comments.
Sure.
That was an amazing video.
Yeah. Yeah, we could do that. And because that's a stunning video about how changing a name. There are animals who have great depth to them, like they're master beings. And when they end up with these names that are like Diablo, who was more diabolical, but he was a very deeply spiritual panther. And when they changed his name to Spirit, his whole life changed. I mean, his whole persona changed because he understood that he was being seen for who he is. He wasn't this dark, sinister figure. He was light and love and a bigger spirit. So names can have a lot of impact. Yeah.
I think that's all the time we have for questions today. But if you have other questions, you can leave them in the comments and we'll talk about them next week.
Great. We'll see everybody next week.